This is something different completely. I haven't been on this channel in a little bit, but we about to check out the fourth dimension. I've always seen this video, like the image of it, but I've never actually clicked on it. So for like example, the fourth dimension, if they're going by like spatial dimensions, then there's a dimension above ours, which is like, you know, right angles. You know, there's a straight line, then there's a right angle. That's 2 dimension, right? A square is a 2 dimension. Then you go a right angle from that, that's a cube. But since we live in the 3rd dimension, we don't know what the 4th dimension looks like. People say it's time. Well, I say it's time, but not the fact that time is a dimension. It's a constant, kind of, basically. But I'm about to get in the video, but I'm gonna say this real quick. I say motion is the 4th dimension, because when you look at a diagram of a 4th dimensional cube, like the tesseract, I think that's what it's called, it looks like it's moving. Like you can see that there's another spatial dimension, but in our dimension there's 3 we see. But if you add motion, like actual cube moving, it's like turning around, I say that's the 4th dimension. I don't know. That's what I'm going with. That's my answer, and I'm sticking to it. All right, let's see what the kid got to talk about. Well, he probably older than me now. This is 10 years ago.
Imagine that this full.
Oh, I didn't even plug it in. I know this channel started out with like Anunnaki and biblical texts and all that, but we gonna see. Oh damn, we gonna see where this goes.
Folder is a dimensional plane. Now, assuming that it is no height and no depth, what would this mean? It would mean that it's a one-dimensional world.
Yeah, just straight. Right?
So if, hypothetically, an organism was living inside of it, it would only be able to move in a linear path forward and backwards in a straight line. Now, if we go to the 2nd dimension, we have 2 dimensions. We have width and we have length. Yeah, so hypothetically, if an organism lived inside of here, then it would be able to move up, down, left, right, and anywhere else in between.
It's in the way.
And a 2-dimensional world is comprised of an infinite series of 1-dimensional worlds plane stacked upon each other. Yeah. Just as our 3-dimensional world, which has depth and length and height, is comprised of an infinite series of 2-dimensional worlds. Like so this now that
I guess you can go with like an MRI, you know, they like cut down, straight down. You can say that's 2-dimensional because they cut straight. That's 1-dimensional, but when you flip it and actually see the actual X-ray, I think that's what it is.
Have stacked many folders upon each other. We have 3 dimensions. We have depth, we have length, and we have width. Now what happens if you keep going on from here on out?
As I say,
we would have a 4-dimensional world. But what exactly is a 4th dimension? In order to understand this, we need to understand how dimensions are perceived. We live in the 3-dimensional world, but despite that, we actually view things to be 2-dimensionally. Take a perfect sphere, for example. If you're looking at a sphere, it looks just like a regular 2-dimensional circle.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Like, a square makes sense as a 3rd-dimensional, but a sphere is kind of weird. Oh, but when you're looking at the screen, it's 2 dimensions, so...
The only way that you can tell it's an actual sphere instead of a circle is because of the hues of light on it. So just like in a 2-dimensional world, if a organism in the 2-dimensional world was looking upon a circle, the light would make it appear to be lighter at one end and darker in the middle. Also, if an object is moving closer and farther away from you, you don't actually perceive that it's getting closer and farther away. You see that it's getting smaller or larger, and then you assume that it's getting either farther away or closer.
Distance.
But let's say that an object was to grow in perfect equilibrium, so that it was growing at the same speed that it was shrinking as you move it farther away. Then you would not be able to tell, without any lights or if there were details on the object, that it's moving or growing at all. You may have assumed that since we perceive things to be in 2 dimensions, that a 2-dimensional organism would see in 1 dimension. So, as we're watching this rubber band expand as it moves farther away from this little organism in the 2-dimensional world, it does not actually perceive anything is happening to it because it's growing at the same speed that it's moving farther away. But since we can actually see it from the three-dimensional world and perceive things to be in 2 dimensions, we can see things for how they actually are.
Okay.
The reason that the two-dimensional organism doesn't see things the way they really are is because the two-dimensional organism sees things in 1 dimension, just how we, three-dimensional creatures, see things in 2 dimensions. So in a way, we don't really see our world the way it truly is.
For example, when you're driving your car, you're driving on a one-dimensional, two-dimensional surface. So we're actually on the surface of the planet, and roads make it flat. So we're going in 2 dimensions, right? Up and down. That's all you can go, up and down. You can't go up. I mean, you can't go, you're staying on the road. For a plain example, it can go any direction. It can go left, right, up, down, circle, spin, all that. But in a car on the road, you can only go up and down. So that kind of get at what he's talking about with a 2-dimensional creature only can see in 1 dimension because you can only see 2 dimensions, left and right, right? Or left and right, up and down, right? That's 2 dimensions. Yeah, because that makes a square.
A 4-dimensional creature, however, seeing our 3-dimensional world in 3 dimensions, would be able to see through things. Would be able to see absolutely everything, just as we could see if there was several organisms spread along a 2D environment on your floor. You would be able to see inside houses. You would be able to see inside of people. So if a 2-dimensional world, a flat surface, is just made of an infinite amount of lines, then the 3D world is just made out of an infinite amount of planes. So the 4D world, logically, is made out of an infinite amount of 3D objects. Though they're not just put together like you would like building blocks. That's not how the 4D world is. That would just be 3D again. So in order to understand this, we need to understand the logical progression of mathematics in our world. Imagine that this connects piece represents the first dimension. It's simply a straight line, which is basically what the first dimension looks like. And if you add 3 more of these straight lines and connect them so that adjacent sides are perpendicular and opposite sides are parallel, then you have the basic shape of the second dimension. You have a square.
Yeah.
Now if you keep going from here and you add it so that there's a total of 4 squares and all adjacent sides are perpendicular and all opposite sides are parallel, then you end up with, obviously, a cube.
3rd dimension.
So, if you tried to keep going from here, and you would have a 4-dimensional basic shape, you would have what's called a tesseract.
Tesseract, right?
Now, I cannot show you a tesseract, but you need to understand that.
I think the tesseract was what was in Infinity War, I think. The stone.
It's basically 4 cubes that are within each other that have all adjacent sides perpendicular and all opposite sides parallel. Yet there are 4 lines connecting to each vertex. So a tesseract would look somewhat like this picture. Now that's not something exactly like what it looks like, because this is a 2-dimensional depiction, and obviously not all the lines are straight. So I cannot show you what a tesseract actually looks like because we cannot perceive things in the 3rd dimension. You cannot even imagine what a tesseract looks like. You cannot in your mind picture the 4th dimension or a 4th dimensional shape. And you can keep going on from the 4th dimension even. You can go to the 5th dimension, the 6th dimension, the 71st dimension. It doesn't matter. Theoretically, there are an infinite amount of spatial dimensions. A common misconception of the 4th dimension is that the 4th dimension is time. Now, while some argue that by going forward and backwards in time, if you move forward the same distance and backwards the same, then you would end up in the same place you started, just like in the 4th dimension. And while that may seem logical, if you think about it, it really doesn't make sense. If you imply that the 4th dimension is actually time, well, first of all, time is not spatial. There's a difference between space and time, quite obviously. And assuming that all dimensions are according to a pattern, then that doesn't really make sense either, because saying the 4th dimension is time, every dimension has time in it, So that would mean that the fourth dimension is special in some way, which doesn't really make any sense.
I get what he's saying, but what if the actual spatial dimensions are actual spatial dimensions? It's just the movement and stacking of atoms. You feel me? Like you can say like the fundamental properties, the elements, atoms, like quarks, Plancks, the Planck distance, quarks. If the quarks are the smallest things, they're one-dimensional things. So when you stack them, they become the other dimensions. So would they really be spatial, or would they just be stacked one-dimensional objects becoming higher and higher dimensions? So I want to sound like too smart. I don't know what the answer is. I'm just saying, what if it's that? It's other dimensions stacked on other dimensions, but they're not actual spatial. They're just one-dimensional things in a different configuration. Like I say motion. What if motion is the fourth dimension, and the perception of time is the fifth dimension? Like our memories are the fifth dimension, but us moving around and being able to like go in different directions, that's the actual fourth dimension. Like you get the spatial, like an orbit and like a magnetic and what do you want to say, the electromagnetic field. That's kind of the third dimension, because I think with electricity goes up and magnetism goes around. I think that's how it goes, but everything kind of is in the electromagnetic spectrum. So if you do that and things stack above that, wouldn't that make the fourth dimension? I don't know. I'm guessing, but I think that makes sense.
Another reason this doesn't make sense is that we very, very, very slightly travel through time whenever we move due to the distance that light takes to get to our body.
Yeah.
Now, if a group of astronauts were to get in a spaceship and they were to go very, very, very close to the speed of light, then
time doesn't exist. Color doesn't exist. They're just byproducts of other things. If there was only one object in the entire universe, there would be no time. If there are two things, then there's distance, and to get from one object to the other object, that's time. But if there's one, there's no time. If there's no bounce, reflection off an object, there's no light, there's no color. And the only reason we see that is the distance each, what do you call it? Pulse? Not pulse. Wave. That's simple. I can't go any. Each wave of the light, if it's stretched out, then it's a different color, but it's all a wave. It's just the height and the distance between each peak.
And they went around in this impossible, nearly the speed of light spaceship for a few months, and then afterwards they returned to Earth. They would find that Earth had actually progressed a few years, so they had moved forward in time by moving that quickly. Another interesting concept involving the fourth dimension is that many physicists and even mathematicians may say that the dimensions are very, very slightly curved, because if you really think about it, nothing can be truly, absolutely infinite. So imagine that the first dimension, the line, is just very, very slightly curved, so that after a very long time, it will end up creating a circle. So, as suggested by many physicists, if you keep going in the same direction, then you will end up where you started after a very, very long amount of time, obviously. Right? And the same thing would happen to the second dimension. If it's just a square, and then you extend it very, very slightly in a curve, then it will eventually make a sphere. And the same thing happens in our dimension, except it will form a very, very slightly curved third dimension, which will form a four-dimensional universe, basically. So what this kind of means is that our three-dimensional world is within a four-dimensional world, and the four-dimensional world is within a fifth-dimensional world, and so on. Now, I did say that nothing can be truly infinite, but if this is true, and a dimension is really within another dimension, within another dimension, within another dimension, then I'm implying that there's an infinite amount of dimensions, which is the only problem I really have with this theory. I'm not sure if it ever stops, or if infinity is really even possible. We don't know that. Thanks for watching my video, and I hope this gave you a better idea of what the fourth dimension is.
Infinities, right? Fractals of fractals, right?
My internet, my rules. Introducing My Home from Verizon. It's internet and entertainment.
A second, I'm gonna go back to that one, but it's basically saying that space is infinite, the universe is infinite, because nothing actually stops. It just keeps going. Fractals of a fractal. The only reason we see three-dimension because we're three-dimensional beings inside of a three-dimensional universe, but above us is a fourth dimension that created a third dimension, and the higher dimensions create the lower dimensions. So infinitely, like he said, if a straight line isn't infinitely straight because of gravity or whatever force that bends and curbs space because of time, it would eventually call a circle, which makes a third dimension, and a second dimension, which the second dimension ultimately creates third and fourth. Yeah, is there really an answer? Don't know. We're just mortal beings inside this infinite universe that we perceive to be relative to us. Yeah.